Hey there, this is Troy Yamaguchi for Eclipse TCG, and today we have a follow-up to our last week's video on Pillars of the Metagame. In that video, we talked a little bit about some of the new strategies that people are bringing to the Ashes of Empire format that are currently going to be defining the Galactic Championship. And in this video, I want to talk a little bit about some of the decks that have existed in the past that have received some notable upgrades in Ashes of Empire. And I want to go a little bit further and discuss what constitutes a relevant upgrade for a deck. Some of these decks have changed a lot. Some of these decks have changed very, very little, but are situated perhaps a little bit better. So that's what we're going to be talking about today in this video. Before I start, I just want to ask, what are you guys trying? Leave a comment below. I'm very interested to hear not only what has worked, but what has not worked, and especially why you think that might be the case. We're still very much in the exploratory phase of this metagame. I mean, the set isn't even out for several weeks now, and we still have about a month to prepare. So we're in a position where we are trying a bunch of different things and trying to figure out, what's good, what's bad. And when you're trying different types of decks, something that's important is taking and understanding what about a deck makes it good or bad. And this is what gives your testing kind of global validity and lets you learn things even when you're trying archetypes that you don't end up playing at this next tournament that you're preparing for. So just to review what happened in our Pillars of the Metagame discussion, we pointed out the Cad Bane Blue and Ezra Bridger Yellow strategies as kind of like the major contenders that are defining the metagame right now that didn't exist in the past, and these decks remain to be pretty strong. I want to give a quick update on just where I'm thinking with these decks, or just like what I've seen about this. One of our questions last week for the Cad Bane Blue strategy was, what's going to happen with this deck's curve and how is this deck kind of situating itself in the metagame? This is still the most played deck, and I still think it's a very strong contender, but what's been kind of my observation with how Cad Bane is playing is that it's taking the curve up a little bit in terms of its bombs. It's playing like SRI pretty frequently, and using this to kind of cement its place as like the tallest deck in the format, or I guess the tallest like non-greed deck in the format. So that's like pretty notable. Continues to give it vulnerabilities into space. Of course, a lot of its interaction has to be tech to not lose to space. So that's what's currently defining the metagame right now. And then the space aggro strategy in the form of Ezra, for me, kind of like the big thing that this deck is providing to the metagame in terms of structure is that you just kind of like really, really want to have upgrade removal in your deck. When Ezra acquires like 10,000 equips, the game becomes quickly like very unwinnable. So I just want to give a quick update to that video, and these are the two major things that are structuring my understanding for the course of this talk. Okay. For our subject today, in terms of new cards impacting old strategies and what we're looking for in terms of this exploratory phase when we look at, okay, not just what are the new decks that we can build in terms of Cad Bane Blue and Ezra Yellow, but like looking back and like improving or updating old strategies that have been like valid and powerful in the past. Okay, how do we go about thinking about what new cards would be impactful? And if we see a card in Ashes of Empire that we think, does this change the game for any new strategies? I usually try to split these into two different categories of upgrades for decks. And the first one is like the more like kind of exciting and impactful. And it's this idea of like a missing puzzle piece. So you might have a strategy in the past that like was doing something pretty good, but was just missing a little bit something. Either it's like curve is weak at a certain point, or you had to put like bad cards in your deck just because the card pool wasn't very fleshed out. And this was like something that you saw pretty often in the Lawless Time metagame, just because it was post rotation, so we lost like tons of playable cards. So this is something that jumps out immediately when you see something, for example, like Ninth Sister and Chimera. And these cards will be featured in the deck lists that we talk about for the major archetypes this week. Something like Ninth Sister, if you think about Boba Fett Lake Country, something that deck had to do was frequently on 7. It didn't have like a powerful curve card to be playing. And this is something that Ninth Sister accommodates for. So that's something that, it ticks off in your mind like, hey, this is perfect in that deck. And, finds a home for it immediately. Another thing is a very impactful, powerful card that you're trying to build around. So this is something like an Admiral Akbar. We've seen something like the Leia Hyper Aggro deck from the Swoop Racers that is like focused on this Akbar card that you think, this card doing something really unique and cool. Let's go try to find a home for it. Maybe it goes in something like the Leia that existed before, but just like didn't have that core component to put it over the top. So that's kind of the more noteworthy and striking form of upgrades to decks. And then the other side of this discussion is as new cards come out, obviously decks always improve in their absolute quality. You have more options and you have more things that you can choose from when you're deciding on your final deck list. So as new cards come out, if you find these decks that just like needed more of the same types of cards to hit the critical mass that they needed, that's always something you're looking out for as well. And we have one deck on this list that really fits that criteria pretty well. And we'll be talking about the deck list in just a bit. These are the archetypes that I wanted to discuss this week. I talked a little bit about them in our Pillars of the Metagame format. It's Admiral Piett Blue, Boba Fett Lake Country, and Leia Data Vault. These are all decks that have been around in the past. I think that in terms of what I've been able to find, these are the three decks that are most advantaged by some of the changes in Ashes of Empire, and they're good for different reasons. I think Piett got a really, really big missing puzzle piece in the form of the Chimera 7 cost ship. And this is because the 7 cost ships like didn't feel quite that impactful in the past. Like something like a Cantwell Arrestor is like pretty good, obviously, but it's just like a removal staple to a body. Chimera feels like a really, really imposing like Doom card to where if you have not killed this Piett deck and you don't have removal for the Chimera, if the Chimera just sits there, like they can never die, They're going to be healing. Its heal is not once per turn as well. So I think that deck got a missing puzzle piece, and it just makes me think like, is Admiral Piett Blue really a strong strategy now? And that's something that I'm interested in and something I've been playing. And I don't know, it's kind of an easy find just because this Piett deck mostly built itself. So we'll talk about that one in a little bit. The Boba Fett deck hasn't got very many new cards, but I think it's really well positioned in the metagame. And then Leia Organa, especially like as a Data Vault deck, is kind of just a pile of mid-range slop. So I think this deck actually got a ton of new cards in the blue-green colorway that it really, really likes. So I'm excited to talk about that list. Real quick, before we get into the deck list, I want to talk about what we're going to be discussing in our Metafy community. We'll be going in a lot more depth on these concepts. I will be taking the town hall this week where I'll go even more depth on how I go about selecting archetypes and how I go about recognizing when a good strategy is looking me in the face. This is the one thing that I think I'm actually very good at in card games. My technical play is far weaker than I would like, and my ability to find new strategies isn't very good, but something that I really focus on is when I play something, I try to understand why this deck wins or loses. And when something happens to me when I'm testing online, I think it's one of my skills that I'm able to say, wow, that was broken. I want to look into that. Or that was kind of gimmicky. I think that's a little bit weak. So that's what I'm going to be talking about in our town hall this week. And then we have our live testing, as always. Tyler York and Everly will be testing some of the lists that we talk about today against the pillars of the format that we discussed last week. So if you want a deeper discussion on any of the things that we talk about on our channel, you can always find us on our Metafy community. Link is on the description as always. So with that said, let's get into the deck list. The first one I want to talk about is Boba Fett Lake Country. And I mean, like I said earlier, this deck has not changed like hardly whatsoever. There are a couple of new cards that I'm eschewing in this deck list. The Vane Snub Fighter, I think, is a pretty medium card. Your deck does not go wide, so you don't get like turbo value out of the Vane. So you just think to yourself like, how often am I going to be able to put enough advantage on this card to make it even just better than the vanilla 4/3? I don't think the 4 HP is super relevant for the Vane's Snub Fighter. It does withstand the Cad Bane Ping and the Tie Dagger like on curve. That's relevant, but like usually they're going to be working on your 2-drop still, and like your ships are going to die. It's kind of is what it is. The reason that I want to point out this deck, and it's not because of just like the Ninth Sister is here, and so now you have something to do on 7 resources, and like that's, powerful. Although I am like pretty high on this Ninth Sister card. It's incredibly, her name says it well. She's hulking, like she's huge, she's +1, like the body just needs to be removed with an event, basically. It's pretty hard to destroy this thing through combat. So, this card's really good, and it fixes something that was an issue with the deck's curve, which is that it didn't have anything to play on 7. But the whole reason I'm bringing this Boba Fett deck like back into the spotlight is that it is out of the spotlight. And when that happens, this deck is just like a stat check deck. It runs rampant. When people aren't prepared for it, this deck does a Sabine impression, and I think it's really powerful. So I actually think that this deck is incredibly well positioned. It's not the most exciting deck. It doesn't have a ton of new cards or anything cool like that, but cannot forget about this guy and needs to absolutely be considered as we're preparing for this Galactic Championship tournament. If the GC was literally tomorrow, I would probably just play Boba Fett Lake. Like, I think this deck is not being accounted for in online testing whatsoever, which is like fair and true just because it's a known quantity and like you know how to play around and like what you're trying to include to beat this deck. So all of that being the case, I would be very surprised if this deck was not like at least relevant for GC. So wanted to shout that out especially and point out how even though it didn't receive a ton of new cards in Ashes of Empire, it did get one pretty impactful one, and I think its metagame position is pretty good given that a lot of decks have issues dealing with a piloted leader. I think that's kind of like the main thing right now, and just like tall leaders in general. So want to point that out. This deck, pretty cool. The one that I shouted out in our Pillars of the Metagame forum video was Admiral Piett Blue. I think this deck got a ton of good support in Ashes of Empire. You can see that there are 21 new cards in this list. It's, a huge chunk. It's everything throughout the curve. It's anything from your early game plays in the 2 drops in Moff Gideon, additional ground sentinels in the form of Imperial Armored Commando when you don't have the ability to go Gonk Droid into Corvus, which is really what you would prefer, but that's fine. But also it got like win conditions, right? So the big one for me is Chimera. I think this card is monster broken in this deck. You play it on 5. Worst case scenario, you just sell out your leader. Like, it doesn't really matter. You would prefer to be able to play Lawbringer on 6R, and maybe even Lawbringer should be a 3 of in this deck for that reason. But against the aggressive decks where Chimera is really necessary, it doesn't really matter. If you just put Chimera on the board, you will not die. You will be able to heal whenever anything happens to your opponent. And then if you make it to 7, a lot of decks are stacking 1 arena currently, and the reason for that is because of Cad Bane Blue. Makes it pretty difficult for aggressive decks to have much of anything on the ground, right? So you play Chimera, you live for 6R, just don't die, I don't know, play Lost and Forgotten, heal 5, like that's ridiculous. And if you make it to 7 and Turbo Laser, whatever arena they're stacking, you will win the game. I mean, it's pretty impossible to lose from that position. So all of these things considered, this is something that was really missing from Piett before. Cantwell Arrestor was not on the level of this Chimera card. It was a very good card, and maybe should even make the list. I'm not like, again, these are sample lists. These are like where I'm starting right now. Feel free to iterate. This is by no means like the end-all be-all type of deck list for these things. But I think Chimera is a very big missing puzzle piece from this deck in terms of like an incredibly impactful card on flip turn and just like a very powerful like anti-aggro tool. This thing is horrifying, for any aggressive deck. They're flipping their leader and you're playing a card that says I heal 2 every turn and also kills like their biggest thing. Like, it's crazy. Okay, so that's like the big takeaway. This deck also got more win cons. Ravager is a pretty horrifying card. It's a little bit awkward to play in a world where blue villain is very represented because like it's expensive and then like they just point at it and kill it and then you're sad. But nonetheless, this card is very powerful and is doing something great. And just the existence of Pre-Vizsla to give your deck more real top end. This Pre-Vizsla card is much better than a lot of the capital ships, even though you have to pay full cost for it. I would say this card, I mean, you can just see it in the reason that Cad Bane Blue does not play, Lawbringer or anything like this. This Pre-Vizsla card is broken. So I think it even makes the cut in this deck list. I don't know, it's a flex spot. Like, maybe you could tweak it around. But like, all these things are very good qualities. And then let's not forget that your early game has improved. The droids that got printed in this set are very relevant. The fake Pershing BD or 8D8 is the guy's name. This card's great. I mean, it gives you cards in hand to answer anything, and it charges aggressive negotiations, which I think is pretty good in this deck, just because, I mean, you need to finish the game eventually. And the addition of the Palace Chef droid, which is just a droid with Sentinel to pull off of Invisible Hand, like, that's amazing as well. So you have more droids, you have more impactful droids. You're not playing the 2/3 Restore guy. I mean, you could. I think that card is so-so. I really don't feel a certain way about it. But like, again, your win cons have improved. you've supported one of the best cards in your deck, which is Invisible Hand, right? You have like more things to pull off of him, as well as a Sentinel that gives board impact immediately to Invisible Hand. So like all of these qualities are very, very strong. I think this deck got a lot better. It was already something that was at the fringe of like good, I would say. And that to me says, take a look at Piett, try to understand why it's good and try to understand what the best Piett deck looks like. I'm kind of like against Colossus right now just because the format have moved a little bit back to board control, and the deck is already like inconsistent as it is. You need to play just a lot of, top end cards. So I would prefer not to have to play Colossus, but it's an option as well. And then just like figuring out what your ratios of bombs and capital ships are. So anyway, that's what's going on with this guy. I think he's very, very strong, and I think that he's absolutely something to consider. And at the minimum, is like a great showcase of like why new cards give you arguments to look at previous leaders. It starts with Chimera on 5, and then you look and you see, wow, this guy actually got like a bunch of really quality cards all throughout the curve. So that's my thesis on Admiral Piett. I'm actually medium high on this guy, which is not typical. I'm a known Admiral Capital Ships hater, but this one is pretty good. Okay, so that's Admiral Piett in the blue-green villain side. Let's look at a pretty similar deck in the blue-green hero side. Leia is something that has always been around and like at minimum fringe playable since rotation. I think she was a pretty decent deck last format. The thing that she always lacked was consistency and redundancy and just a critical mass of good cards to be playing in the early game. There were too many games where she would have to just play out something really, really subpar in one of her turns because it's a Data Vault deck. And in addition to that, it's just like kind of a clunky deck to play because of the disclose requirement. I can't tell you the number of times like I would be like, oh, getting cooked. And then they just have to play out like a blue leader in space blank on 3 or 4. And it's just like, oh, like that's not very exciting. Okay, we're chill. So, okay, what did Leia get? If you look at the new cards that I've included in this deck list, a lot of her low end is from Ashes of Empire. A lot of these cards are really, really powerful. Hu Yang is a ridiculous card. Whenever this thing's effect is live, this thing is plowing. -4 is ridiculous. You essentially just vanquish whatever unit is in question. And there are a lot of incidental like upgrades. You think of like advantages, relevant quality, and even in this Leia deck, if you're playing a mirror match and they put a token on the guy, it just no longer exists. So you pin their ability to do what their deck is built to do. So this card's crazy. The inclusion of Neil on this list is something that's interesting. This is a card whose gimmick potential I'm pretty low on. Whenever my opponent is playing like a Neil deck, when they're trying to just make a fast unit with 1 power, it doesn't ever look very good. But in Leia specifically, she has not only like a ton of upside with Han Solo, but Neil is he's essentially a Gungi that might do something and is action intensive and loses you the initiative. That's like what he breaks down to. And just the ability to have additional synergies in your deck list with Han Solo, with even like a Pershing synergizes with Neil on 3R, like these are good qualities. And 2-card combos in this game are generally horrible unless the 2 cards are individually good. So the reason that the Neil 2-card combo in other decks isn't very good is that Neil itself is like an incredibly mediocre card. I mean, a 1/4 for 1 is like, it's fine. It's not too exciting. I mean, this card existed. His name was R2-D2 the pilot, and it was not ever played as a 1-drop. But in this deck, Neil is just Gungi, like in its worst case scenario, and that is a totally acceptable card to be playing. So all those reasons, I think the Neil is good. I don't know how much further I would index into Neil usefulness. It would probably not be very much just because the 1-power guys are generally pretty bad, but there's a lot you can do with this. I mean, 8d8 is a 1-power unit. It's like another thing to consider. Spy tokens, this thing has synergy, I believe, with those. Let's see. Next unit you play this phase. No. Okay, so it's not created. But regardless, the reason for his inclusion is not just for the Han Solo combo, it's because it's a good card independently. So that's something that is important to consider. And then the Bo-Katan 2-drop, this card overperforms crazy as well. Her issue is that the other Mandalorians that are available to be played in this color are usually horrible. So she's a good card. She's gated by her trait. The only like decent card to play on 3 in the Mandalorian trait is the 2/1 ship that makes a Mandalorian token. That card is incredibly medium. I don't think it warrants play over something like the other new card you could play, which is Yellow Aces Bomber. This card's crazy. In any sort of racing matchup, I mean, this card just pushes a metric ton of damage. It synergizes with your leader. It is Fleet Lieutenant. Like, this card's broken. Yellow Race's Bomber is a great include. And if you just look at the rest of the curve, Sentinels in space. I mean, the T6 shuttle is Bright Hope with real text. Koska Reeves is one of the best cards in the set, bar none, and gives you just such a strong value backbone. It's mono pip as well, which is something that your leader enjoys. So here is a deck that none of the individual cards are that exciting, but just on the raw number of playables that it got, you can see it's playing 22 new cards. A third of the deck is just printed in Ashes of Empire. That is something that the Leia Data Vault strategy was really lacking. So I think this deck is good. I think its perfect deck list is very much in question. This is a deck that is actually pretty difficult to build just because you have to balance all your ratios as well as disclosed requirements. I mean, even just like looking over my deck list here, I would probably want more mono green pips just because that's the important thing for your leader. So I would consider if Trask Walker is good in this deck. I'm really not sure, but in terms of a starting point, I think this is a very strong place to begin. I think a lot of good things are happening with this deck, and I think it's, something that I don't know if this will ever be like the greatest deck to be playing just because it still always has some consistency issues. And at the end of the day, you're like a fair deck that's just trying to play like mid-range value-based SWU. But I'm really happy with a lot of the new cards that have come up for this deck, and definitely want to give it a shout and want to see people take this, build it, iterate upon it, and optimize it. Most people in the blue-green hero world are just playing Luke Data Vault, the new flips on 7, restores 5 million Luke. Out of like new toy syndrome, I'm pretty low on that deck. I don't think it's very good. I think it's just almost like categorically inferior to this. And the reason for that is because when that deck wins, it has a board advantage. I mean, when it's, your leader is powerful. Luke is a crazy, crazy leader. He's, basically an 8/7. But in terms of like how you win the game, either you have a board advantage when Luke flips, which means you should win the game with any leader, or when you're losing the game and you're in the hole, like Luke does not like swing the game around himself. Like, he's huge, but if he doesn't have a board, he's not very useful. So all these things make me think that Leia is the better blue-green hero deck, and kind of supports the argument because this has been a good deck in the past. So wanted to shout this out. In particular, really want to see this played more. I think this deck is pretty strong. Okay, so to wrap things up, I just want to give some final theory-based thoughts about when decks improve. I really, really want to point out, and kind of like the takeaway from this discussion, when you compare something like the way that Boba Fett has improved in his position as opposed to Piett and Leia, is the concept of like absolute power versus contextual power. As card pools increase, decks always get better. This is pretty much a fact unless they print 100 Porgs in a set, like X plus 1. If you get one good card, your deck is is absolutely better. X plus 1 is always more than X, right? But it is not enough for a deck simply to get a broken card, right? The fact that Ninth Sister has been printed will not make, the 7,000th best red villain force deck good. It's not automatically going to make, let's just say, like Darth Maul yellow a good deck, but it might. What's more important is how your deck is performing within the context of a metagame and what your deck is doing with its new cards. So with that in mind, I just want to leave you with this thought. When you're evaluating new cards, as is something we're doing right now, always think about the individual cards in the context of their decks, because you can have broken cards that do not have homes, right? And I talked about this kind of on the +2 channel way back when I was looking at something like Tear the Ship Apart. It's like a really cool card, but its colors aren't very good. And Single Reactor Ignition and the 7-cost Luke Skywalker. Like, these are all like powerful cards that at the start of the Lawless Time format did not have decks to support them, and are still good cards. But once they receive a home, once they receive a deck that can support them and make full use out of them, you get to really see the power of these cards. So always evaluate cards in the context of their decks. And then one step beyond that, always evaluate a deck in the context of the metagame, because you can have the most broken deck of all time. If it is just hard countered by the most popular and most winning decks currently, it's not going to shine. So this is where something like a Boba Fett derives a lot of the power of its position from. That is a deck where when people are prepared for it, its stats don't really work out. And when people aren't, it runs people over. So that's what I wanted to talk about really today. not just leaving you with the deck lists, but start thinking about what else might fit into this structure. What new cards might make new decks valid, and what new decks in this world where we've discussed a lot of the good decks that people are playing might also be good choices. So think about that and then tell me about them because I want to know too. So that's all we have today. As always, please join our Metafy community. That's where the discussion continues. Thank you, as always, to our sponsors, Rochester CCG and Premier Games. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next.